Hi, Warren Bird here, Research Director, Leadership Network. I'm talking with Mike Ely, who's the pastor, a long title, big business card, Neighborhood Groups, Missional Communities, and Discipleship at Woodside Bible Church in Greater Troy, Michigan. Doug Schmidt is the pastor. Before we talk about the exciting things that are happening with leadership development, the context is the last dozen or so years, the church has just skyrocketed, more than tripling in attendance, which through mergers and church planting to a degree, and reaching people for Christ through the original campus. But while it's a great problem to have, if you don't do something inside well in terms of leadership development, it's just a crowd, or the crowd goes away. So, Mike Ely, tell us first your this title of pastor of Neighborhood Groups, Missional Communities, and Discipleship. Unpack that a little bit, and then let's dig into your story. Welcome.
Well, yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Warren. Well, it started out as just neighborhood groups were our small group vehicle, kind of more missional community vehicle, and we started out just as that, but then we realized that unless discipleship is going to be at the engine, where we're going to develop leaders to lead those groups of people, then it's not going to go anywhere. So I shifted, my job kind of naturally shifted to more of a discipleship pastor role because of the need to develop leaders. And so that's kind of how it broadened, because we said we have vehicles, but we just don't have engines and we don't have drivers. And so we needed engines and drivers more than vehicles. And too often, that's what large churches like ours do. We think a vehicle is going to solve the problem, and vehicles are good, but it's not the whole story.
Well, let's get into the engines and drivers. How are you? First, give us kind of the overview. How are you building into your leaders? How are you sustaining them for the long term?
Well, we're building into them. We're trying to go back. We're looking at 3DM's helping us really in a lot of ways, and because we're looking at how did Jesus actually develop leaders.
Okay, pause right there for just a second. Tell us what 3DM is, who the name is behind it, and then come back to the story.
Yeah, 3DM is an organization, three-dimensional ministries out of South Carolina, formerly in England, led by Mike Breen and his team, and they're kind of on the cutting edge, I would say, of discipleship and missional communities. A lot of good information, a lot of good books, and just a lot of good coaching. So they do a lot of consulting and coaching, especially for mega churches. Their desire is to reach like 30,000 churches in America in the next, 30 years or something like that. So very, very involved, very good organization. They've been very helpful for us.
Okay, back to the story. Tell us kind of what you were doing and then the difference using the 3DM process.
Well, we started out doing neighbor groups, and it was a model we had taken from Christ Church of the Valley in Phoenix, Arizona, and they were very successful in doing that. And so we thought, well, let's give that a shot. Maybe that'll work for our people. And it's really a proximity, geographically based missional community. And so we're trying to get our people to reach the people that are in their neighborhood with other Woodsiders that are in their neighborhood. Well, that kind of fell flat for us. We really had a hard launch and tried to make it happen, but it really didn't work. So around that time, I was coming in and they were trying to figure it out. And I had been in contact with just different organizations, because I'm a big believer in, like, maybe the answer is not here. Maybe we need to go outside and have somebody from the outside, help give us an answer. That's why we love things like Leadership Network so much, because sometimes the answer is from the outside. So they drew this illustration about vehicles. And they talked about, vehicles, they promise a lot sometimes, but if they don't have an engine under the hood and they don't have somebody driving it, then it's just a nice looking vehicle from the outside. And we said that's kind of where we fell, is we thought the vehicle would solve the problem. And I think that's why so many churches switch out their ministry vehicles so often, because we try a vehicle and it doesn't work, and then we just go on to the next one thinking that there's some kind of silver bullet vehicle out there that's going to make this work. But vehicles aren't meant to do all that. And so that's why we went back to discipleship. We said, okay, we got to figure out the discipleship thing first. Formally, we had done discipleship. We're almost considered a discipleship church, but it was very broad. It was very broad, and it was mostly information-based. A lot of Bible studies, a lot of men's groups, women's groups, things like that. But as we looked further into how Jesus discipled people, he did give them good information, but he gave them a whole lot more. And so we, 3DM uses this kind of model of how did Jesus disciple people. And it's something that we use now too, and it's very helpful. They say that Jesus did give them info, but then he also imitated ministry for them. And so this for us is this idea that, we have to, our people aren't going to go where we haven't been. So it was a wake-up call to us as a staff of if we're going to ask our people to disciple people, we got to be discipling them as well. And that should be a given, but in the ministry world, and especially in megachurch world, it's not always a given. We have a lot of managers of ministry, but not necessarily people leading movement. And so we wanted people leading movement and just having lives worth imitating. And so this was a big aha moment for us of wow, we really have to imitate ministry for people so that they know how to do ministry. And then, of course, Jesus sent them out. He showed them how ministry worked. And, Jesus and Paul used this model as well. And then he sent them out to innovate in their context. And so what we were doing, and it's a common problem, I think, in the Western church world, is information is kind of king. And so we were just giving people information and giving them a vehicle, and we were saying, go and do it, guys. And it just wasn't working. It just wasn't working. So we're trying to, continue to just go back and say, if this is the way Jesus did ministry, if this is the way Paul did ministry and did discipleship, then maybe we should do this too. So we're not throwing out information. We think information is vitally important, but it's not everything. And so we need to take people along with us on the journey, show them, how to do ministry, apprentice them, invite them into our lives, and then send them out properly to innovate in their context. That's how we've changed.
Really, really helpful. So now you've integrated an idea called Huddles in there, and even said that your Huddles are your engines of discipleship. So show us how that fits into the whole.
Well, Huddle, the main thing with Huddle is we try to do this kind of model in Huddle. So we're giving them good discipleship information. And it's kind of four things we'd say Huddle are. One, we're developing a discipleship language. The idea there is that we never want to underestimate the power of language to create culture. And we feel like before our language was very, very broad. We didn't have a specific church language. Some churches already do. Some churches have a lingo they use, a language, a lot of loaded words are already figured out that all the church knows what it means. But for us, our language was very broad, wasn't very specific. And so, different words mean different things to different people. So one, language is very important. So we wanted to develop a common language. Two, rhythms. We really wanted to get rhythms in our people. So rhythms of, yes, Bible study, but rhythms of reaching out and connecting with not yet believers, and rhythms of community, and rhythms of rest and work, just healthy, natural rhythms that should be in just every believer's life. Three is leadership. So Huddle's not just that, if I'm leading a Huddle, I'm not just leading these guys, but I'm actually training them how to be leaders. And then four is multiplication. So the idea behind Huddle is also that from 4 to 6 months, a Huddle takes about 8 to 10 months, but 4 to 6 months in, I'm looking for all those guys or ladies to start their own Huddles so that it does multiply. So, for example, those are the four things: language, rhythms, leadership, and multiplication. So for example, I started one Huddle, 3DM consultant huddled me. I started a Huddle shortly after that. And a year and a half later, I think we have 250 leaders in Huddle. And so it did multiply quite quickly, which was pretty neat. And so for us, it's been a very effective model for getting the language, getting people some healthier rhythms. People have come back and said, this is one of the best things I've ever done. And making them leaders. And even for our staff, it's been good, to get them more leaders of movement instead of managers.
Wow, up to 250 people involved. That says that you're meeting a need. So tell me two pieces of the Huddle from their perspective. First, kind of what's the mechanics of it? Is it once a week? For how long? How's it structured? Where is it? And the like. And then secondly, tell me what motivates me as a lay leader not to say, oh, I got to go to Huddle tonight, but to say, hey, this is life-giving. I can't wait. It's making me a better leader, or whatever it is doing that's causing 250 people to say, I'm there.
Yeah. this is another tool I like to use just to explain to people kind of how it works. In a lot of discipleship programs in churches, we tend to lean one way or the other. We tend to lean more, organic or organized. And we really believe that discipleship is in the middle. Before I did Huddle, I tended to be a much more organic disciple maker, where I just do life with people, and as things come up, we pray about it, and we deal with it, and it's great. And there's other people on the other side of the pendulum, kind of, where they're more organized. So they're going to go through a book study, a 2-7 series by InterVarsity, or just the different types of men's studies or women's studies that you can do, or Beth Moore studies. Great things. So I'd say both are discipleship, but really it's elements of both that make really holistic discipleship. And so a Huddle is really the organized side of discipleship. And then access to the leader's life that's leading the Huddle is the organic side of discipleship. So really, Huddle in and of itself is just a once a week meeting. But the idea is that for a season, this person is giving you access to their life so that you can imitate some of their practices. It's not so much peer-to-peer relationship as it is a directive, discipleship model.
Wow. Now give me a few more particulars about the Huddle itself. How long does it last? Who leads it? Kind of, is there a content or rhythm in what goes on?
Yeah. Huddles, it can last anywhere from 8 to 10 months. You can accelerate it beyond that. Normally, there's intervals. So we're going to have new content, new information about once a month, and then we're going to continually go over that information. And what we like to say, language creates culture. So we got all these little cheeky sayings, and here's another one of them: is we just like to say it's like a picture, a mirror, and a window. And so as we look at content, whatever content that may be 3DM content, it may be content that your church creates, it may be anything really. First, we look at it from the 30,000-foot view of as we'd be looking at a picture. We're observing it, we're understanding, what it is, and we're just having a conversation about it. And then the next week, we're going to jump into it again, but that picture turns into a mirror. And so now I'm looking at how this personally applies to my life. So the focus of that second Huddle of that month is the mirror focus. So it's all about personal application. So how does this work out in my life, and how does this become a rhythm in my life? Because the philosophy here is that we're not going to take people where we haven't been. So as leaders, we want God to do in us what he's going to do through us first. So in us before through us. So the second week's the mirror, where we're looking at personal application. And the third week is the window, and it's kind of how we see the world in our leadership. So then the third week, we actually apply it to our leadership and say, how am I leading people in this idea? And so it's kind of that Hebrew model of repetition, going over things over and over again. And then, the whole idea of picture, mirror, window, it's kind of the same shape, but it's changing its purpose every time. And then, of course, after that, there's a missional aspect in every month to a Huddle. So we may go on a prayer walk. We may, go and have a party and invite our not yet, follower of Jesus friends to that. And so there's a missional aspect to it. And the reason behind that is that we do see that in the life of Jesus, that, discipleship was done in the context of mission, and mission was done in the context of discipleship. So it's a both and, we need both elements to really do discipleship or mission well.
What do you hear from the leaders who are part of it? What's their typical comment, especially those who have been with you in the church for a while, kind of who had the before and after of previous structures? Why do they make time to be part of this?
I think the reason why someone would make time to be a part of this is one, they see the momentum that it's building in our church and the good things that are happening from it. So people that are a part of it, they tend, not everybody categorically, but people that are part of it, they tend to have a good experience with it. And this is one of the best things they've ever done. And so the advertisement of just personal experience has been huge. The other thing is, as leaders, we're inviting people not just into a Huddle, we're inviting them into a relationship with us. As pastors and directors, as ministers, and even lay leaders, we're inviting people into a relationship with us for a season, and we're saying, would you go on this journey with me? And people tend to like that personal invitation. I when I was young, I remember thinking to myself or saying to people, will you disciple me? Will you disciple me? And I had a hard time finding a men to disciple me because they didn't really know how. And so one of the biggest things Huddle's done is when somebody says, will you disciple me? And someone's been through a Huddle, they know what to do. Now, it's not this is all of what discipleship is, but it is a healthy discipleship model where and it's simple and reproducible, where you give it to people and they can walk away and say, I know how to do this now. And so it's really been helpful in that way.
Let's talk about it from the staff perspective. You're a full-time staff overseeing this. You got 250 people involved. Roughly how many per huddle, and are they lay-led and staff coached, or kind of what's the interface between staff and volunteers?
Well, there's a good mixture of that. Huddle can be anywhere from 4 to 8 people, with one person leading it. I have some staff huddles. I started with them. I have some lay leader huddles. And so we have lay people leading huddles. We have staff people leading huddles. We have staff huddles. We have couples huddles. So it's not just single gender. So I have a huddle right now of our college ministry that I'm helping a guy lead. And it's 8 people, half men, half women. And they're lay leaders in the college ministry. So it can be a mix because it's not really an intimate place. It is a personal space, but it's not really an intimate space. So we're not looking to go too deep into people's issues. We want to more give them tools, but they also have access to the Huddle leader's life if they want to go deeper, kind of offline.
So what do people say no to be part of a huddle? In other words, for staff, was this kind of like one more piece of their portfolio? And for lay leaders, if they were in a small group and doing this and that, is the huddle on top of it? Is it in place of it? Is it a seasonal thing that you can do the huddle for a while and then go back into frontline ministry?
Well, it is a seasonal thing. And, and they go back into ministry normally or start a huddle themselves. But it is a commitment of time, and the commitment level is somewhat high. We do expect people to be a part of a huddle, except for out of the blue kind of situations. And so if we get staff missing huddle too much, we'll actually call them on that, and we'll say, you did commit to this. And sometimes people just say, maybe this isn't a time for you to do this. And it's not something that we force on all the staff. It's only if they want to. So we've invited staff in, and a lot of them have said yes. Some of them have said no, and we're okay with that. We're trusting that this isn't the only thing we do. It's just one of many things we do. It's just been a very effective tool for developing leaders and getting people on the same page.
You talked about words building culture. You go to a church then, and the slogan, for lack of a better word, is if you're not in a small group, you're not really in the church yet. Do you have any kind of word frames that you use to talk about the role of a huddle in terms of leadership development, and how much of the church does it involve? Are children's ministries or music ministries? How many different kinds of ministries are involved in Huddle?
Yeah, we do have quite a few ministries involved. Right now, like our family pastor, who's over all family ministries, was in one of my first huddles. And so he started to use some of the tools with the kids as well. It's worked its way into some of our sermons. So the preaching team, many of those guys have started to work some of it into their sermons. For example, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the main purposes of a huddle is for people to answer these 2 very important questions. Based on the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, Jesus is wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about the wise and the foolish builder. And he says the wise builder is the one who hears these words and actually does something about them. So the main purpose of Huddle is that we'd be able to answer these 2 questions. What is it that God is saying to me through this experience, through this time in my life, through his scripture, and what am I going to do about it? So how am I going to respond in faith to what he is saying to me? And so we've started to apply that even to our sermons now. So we're asking our people after a sermon is preached, what stuck out to you the most in this sermon? And could it be that God's speaking to you through what's sticking out the most in the sermon? And then what could you actually do about that? And then maybe turn to somebody and tell them, hey, this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do about this. So getting people to process more, because we're teaching everybody to process more. This is kind of repentance and belief for us, is a change of mind. What's God saying? And then my belief is like, what am I going to do about that? So those two questions have been really helpful. Even given those two, our fifth graders are going through, we call it transit. We're teaching them to really hear God for themselves. And that's what Huddle does. It facilitates us kind of hearing God. And it's kind of nice. It's somewhat of a spirit-led process. It's got the organic and the organized elements there.
So is that how you, for lack of better words, sell Huddle? Hey, how would you like to be personally discipled by dealing with two questions? Or how do you present Huddle to a group of people to invite them in?
We don't really present it to a group. We normally ask each Huddle leader to invite people specifically into it that he feels God is putting on his heart. As we go back and look at the ministry of Jesus, he went up on the mountain, he prayed all night, and he came down and he chose the 12. And so, we're not Jesus, but we're thinking, hey, let's apply some of that here. And so we're saying, will you pray and say, who do you think might go on a discipleship journey with you? And maybe invite those people. And so really, it's a personal invitation after a Huddle leader has prayed about inviting people in.
And you use the phrase discipleship journey. So in the congregation, do the lay leaders perceive this as kind of a discipleship track just for them? Or I'm looking for the phrases that you use.
Yeah, I mean, the only phrase we have right now as far as that is just Huddle. People know what Huddle is. They call it a discipleship huddle. And so it is for leaders. It's specifically for leaders. And so not everybody is involved, and we're not looking to get the whole church involved. As a leader gets this kind of toolbox or tool belt, they're going to use it in their ministry, and they're going to huddle some people, but they're also not going to huddle everybody. So they just kind of use this stuff in their leadership. That's been very helpful. So as far as a specific thing, it's not that specific outside of discipleship huddle. People know about that.
There's kind of a movement about doing church as a team and doing leadership as a team. Does this Huddle idea feed into that in terms of creating cultures of apprentice leaders and of shared leadership?
Yeah, I believe it does. I believe it's very helpful. One thing we say, though, is someone can be a fan or a follower. And so someone can actually really look at Huddle from the outside and say, that's a really good thing. I'm glad we're doing that. Or they can actually, actively participate themselves. And what we found is that sometimes it can cause a little bit of, people feeling on the outside because they haven't really jumped into it themselves. So it tends to be something, it can be something that ends up in competition with other ministries, because it does gain a lot of momentum very quickly, and tends to be a movement within the church, which is a good thing because we need to build a discipleship culture. But, like I said, not everybody wants to go on this specific journey, and that's okay. But, it can cause some tensions sometimes.
Let's land by talking about you personally, and maybe a story you can tell about someone else. You personally, the typical pastor, you hear stories of them having their week, whatever their role in the church, is a lot of one-on-one meetings with people where they're kind of mentoring, discipling, and all. How has this discipleship huddle approach affected your week? And then talk about a layperson. How has it? Tell us kind of a hero story of somebody that's like your poster child of what you hope God will do through it.
Okay, great. For me personally, another aspect of Huddle is it's not one-on-one discipleship anymore. So I was a big believer before this one-on-one discipleship, and I still think there's definitely times for or time one-on-one with people, and that whole point of giving access, to the people in your Huddle to your life. You say to them, hey, I want to spend time with you. So I take these guys out to lunch and breakfast, and we do life together, and they come to my missional community, some of them. And so that's good. But what we're realizing is that Jesus, he really didn't disciple a lot one-on-one. He kind of discipled a group of guys. And so we're telling people, let's do this. Let's multiply our efforts by discipling more people at once. And what we found is that group dynamic actually disciples people better than a one-on-one dynamic. And so it's really multiplied my efforts personally, because instead of having 4 one-on-one meetings, now I'm having 4 meetings of 8 people, which, it's exponentially increased my influence and my leadership of the people I'm leading. So that's been great for me. That's what it's added to me. Instead of doing numerous one-on-one meetings, I'm doing fewer meetings with more people. And so it's just exponentially increased my influence and leadership. I would say the poster child, we have a couple, but what I think happens is that people go through Huddle, they experience it, they start a Huddle themselves, but where I think this really lands is in missional community. Because what happens is once you lead a Huddle, that becomes the core leadership team of your missional community. And because part of the Huddle is doing mission together anyway, then we're pulling in our wives and our kids and some peripheral people that might not go through Huddle, and kind of have this little family on mission that we're out in our neighborhoods and our networks. And so what I've seen is it's taken lay leaders and increased their ability to lead their missional communities really, really well. So I think I have numerous stories about that, just people just really getting it, because this missional community conversation is whole other conversation. Some people even call it like second decision Christianity. I know Hugh Halter says that, and it's definitely a different paradigm than the church world that we're used to. And so what I've seen through Huddle is that people kind of get that paradigm. It's just kind of the next natural, step when you're in a Huddle and start to lead a Huddle.
Final question, just to large churches. The whole question of missional always raises scalability. You're a church worshiping over 7,000 people on a weekend. Now it's through different campuses and services, but you say that you're able to connect with those leaders, including the leaders of missional communities. Talk to your large church counterparts about how this is working if God should continue to entrust you with more souls. Is it scalable?
Yeah, how it's working? Well, it's not always great. So we are a big church, so we have the battles, of big churches. But this has helped us to connect with our leaders, because basically we've said, it is, for us, it's been hard to get small. For some reason, our culture has just had a hard time getting small. So as we're doing missional communities, and these guys need continual encouragement, continual coaching. And so when a Huddle ends, that's not the end of your relationship with the Huddle leader. Now we meet once a month. After Huddle's over, we meet once a month instead of every week. And they still have access to your life as a leader. So I found that the people that have been through Huddle with me, they tend to be a family with me. And so we still connect. We still do a measure of life together, even though they're leading their own groups, and I continue to coach them. So that has been, for me, kind of hard, because I have to continually reproduce myself so that more staff is doing that with their people. And so that's kind of the scalable thing, but it's still very difficult, because we're a big church and it's hard to get small sometimes. We're working on it.
Powerful thoughts, rich insights. From Woodside Bible Church, Greater Troy, Michigan, Mike Ely is the pastor of neighborhood groups, missional communities, discipleship, and you probably wear a lot more hats too. But thank you for this unique insider's perspective.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Warren. Thank you for the opportunity.